Manufacturers around the world are increasingly concerned about their carbon footprint. One company that's actually doing something about it is General Motors. Last fall, the automaker announced that it plans to source 100% renewable energy to power its U.S. sites by 2025, 5 years earlier than previously announced, and 25 years ahead of its initial target, which was set in 2016. By accelerating its renewable energy goal, GM aims to avoid 1 million metric tons of carbon emissions that would have been produced between 2025 and 2030. I'm joined today by Rob Threlkeld, Senior Global Manager of Energy Strategy at GM. Rob has been with GM for his entire 22-year career in manufacturing. Rob, welcome to Assembly Audible.
Thank you. Look forward to the conversation.
How does the company plan to reach its renewable energy goal, and how will it be able to do it ahead of schedule?
Yeah, that is a great question. It really kind of comes down to our four-pillar strategy when we announced the actual commitment to get our global operations to 100% renewable electricity. And it's through our four pillars. The first pillar is energy efficiency, which is obviously optimizing what we use and consume within our manufacturing footprint. And we've invested millions, hundreds of millions into our energy efficiency efforts, over the decades to reduce that ultimate consumption level, which reduces your denominator. Pillar two really focuses on the sourcing of renewable energy and renewable electricity. And we've been doing that for a number of years, going back, actually some decades with some of our original landfill gas efforts, replacing natural gas for landfill gas, which is kind of a biofuel, which is really a precursor to some of the efforts that we've been doing in the electricity space. But then fast forwarding to, working with, individual power producers that are developing our power purchase agreements that we've signed up for, to our utility partners and signing up for green tariffs like we've done, with Detroit Edison in Michigan, or Consumers Energy in Michigan as well, or TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority in Tennessee. Pillar three is looking at, all of this wind and solar we're bringing to the grid really is our intermittent resources. So how do we address, pillar three, which is focused on energy storage? And that's, obviously being an EV manufacturer, as you go to our all electric future, we're developing batteries, such as our all-lithium battery systems for our EVs. Think of that as EVs can be an asset of the future that can store excess renewable electricity and potentially support discharging electricity in the future. So addressing the intermittency is pillar three. And then pillar four really gets at GM. We obviously are a large company, and we can leverage our efforts both in policy and scale to really help scale up the industry. We helped found what was at the time the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. It is now known as the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, as we think about broader diversification and portfolio of clean tech to the industry. So it's really those four pillars is how we're going to achieve our commitments and accelerate them.
Okay, so how is the company using renewable energy right now?
We actually use it really in several ways. As I mentioned, we do some on-site generation ourselves with landfill gas at Orion that we just announced is going to have a $4 billion investment to build the Silverado EV. We also utilize landfill gas at Fort Wayne. So we've got some on-site generation resources and a few on-site solar arrays. However, you could plaster an entire assembly plant with rooftop solar and you'd only get about 20% of the energy consumption. So it really then, to fill in the rest of the gap and the bulk of the void is sourcing offsite. That's through power purchase agreements, as we've mentioned in Texas, in Ohio, and Illinois, that we've got some of our offsite power purchase agreements that are tied to the grid, to working with our utility partners, as noted with Detroit Edison, Consumers Energy, Tennessee Valley Authority, where we've signed up for green tariffs. And one of the key things that I think is important that I've noted with that is we are trying to find, resources that are within relative proximity of our manufacturing footprint too. So it impacts the local emissions that are within that footprint of our manufacturing site and the local grid. So that's another key contributing factor that we've really been looking at as we've looked at the power purchase agreements that are supporting our manufacturing sites or the green tariffs. It's really working to find solutions that are within the local footprint of our manufacturing and non-manufacturing sites.
Wow. Okay. I'm impressed. So GM's energy goals began with reducing energy consumption. Tell us more about some of the things the company has been doing to become more energy efficient.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that really is pillar number one, because that's the lowest cost electron is one that's not consumed. So that's really where we put a lot of focus as a company. And we've seen it, even in households, as you've gone from incandescent light bulbs to LED light bulbs. We've been converting a lot of our manufacturing sites. In fact, there was a even in between, we went to fluorescent light bulbs. So we went from incandescence to fluorescence to now LEDs in a relatively short manner that we've transitioned a lot of those to LEDs in our manufacturing operations. We've put in energy management systems to be able to understand where is our energy being consumed within our manufacturing sites and how do we then optimize the loads within that footprint or design out in new manufacturing and overhauling our manufacturing operations. How do we install more efficient equipment, understanding what our loads are? So data drives a lot of the decision-making processes. It's putting in variable frequency drives for motors that optimize the electricity consumption of our operations. That, in many ways, your electricity footprint of your assembly plants and many of your manufacturing operations are attributed with air movement. It's all being done by motors. It's water movement. It's all being done by motors as you paint a vehicle. So how do you optimize out the design of the energy from the start, and then how do we then optimize the consumption that we've got at the operations, whether it's variable frequency drives, temperature set points as we think about optimizing for temperature, and ultimately the data that drive our decisions from an energy efficiency perspective.
So what can other manufacturers learn from GM's example?
I think the number one thing to learn is we're not in it ourselves. It's everyone has to think about setting, aggressive, strategic, sustainability goals that ultimately decarbonize your operations, focus a lot on your renewable electricity. As we think about transportation and electrification, as other companies look at their fleets, how do you overhaul, fleets to support electric vehicles, all the way down to educating the consumers. How many of you actually look at your electric bill? As you go to an electric vehicle, you're going to, pretty soon, like you do with your iPhone, you can actually control certain costs, or when your kids are actually on their iPhones and their iPads, you have the ability to control your costs as a consumer too in charging your electric vehicle as we electrify. So I think, in a lot of ways, it's working together collectively to accelerate that decarbonized future. I would argue that you should think, more broadly than just your own manufacturing and your footprint as yourself, and join organizations such as the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance. It's a great trade organization, that is focused on the buyer, and it elevates your voice as an individual company with a community of buyers.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much. I learned so much from listening to you speak, and it was an honor. So how can people learn more about GM's energy and carbon strategies?
Well, we just recently published our sustainability report. So I would go to GM's sustainability report and actually take a look at a lot of the great things we're doing as a company. As I mentioned, 000, it focuses around our transportation electrification sector. There's a lot of details in there about our renewable energy goals, how we, reduce consumption of energy within our manufacturing sites as well, which are some of the great aspects. And if, you're in the view, you can even talk to dealers and other components. I think as you think about, it is a broad community. It's not just GM, it's our dealer body that are important to as we think about our electrification as well. And so it's really talking collectively. How do you, as a company, kind of demystify what an all electric future looks like, one that's truly decarbonized, and all the way down to your employees as well, and really work with the employees. There's a lot of interest, and a number of, companies from the millennials to the ones that are new hires that are, eager to understand, how do we really work to decarbonize the grid? How do we do this? And we have to do it at a pace that is traditionally not known. So it's like, how do then companies each set their individual goals, work together as a collaboration of companies, and ultimately set that path moving forward? So the one thing I would leave everyone with is we're all on this journey together. It's something that has to happen at a relatively quick pace as we think about all the investment going into the transportation electrification. How do we work with utilities? How do we work with the regulators? How do we work with legislators to ultimately make this work in a way that actually drives down costs in the end? I mean, you have the ability to control a lot more as we decentralize the grid and decentralize the generation, and giving the customers a lot more control. As I mentioned, rates are being set by utilities these days in ways to kind of entice consumer behavior. And you have a much more an ability going forward to control those costs of how much you pay for that electricity than most people probably know.
For more insights on assembling discrete parts into finished products and the people behind it all, visit our website, assemblymag.com. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast to keep up with our latest episodes. We're also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, so we invite you to follow us there too. This has been Assembly Audible. Thanks for listening.